Looks as it should. Here we go. So the eagle-eyed and observant among us will notice that we are going to be talking about habits today. Habits and the things we do really regularly are really helpful or can be really hindering when it comes to our personal journey. This is the first section on our habit area, and we are going to look at today what a habit is and how we can use something called the habit loop to help us, and we can design our own habits. So let's go. Okay, so firstly, what is a habit? Now, before I get going, a lot of the information that I'm going to share today is taken from a seminar that was run by a guy called Coach Stevo in 2016. Coach Stevo is a co-founder of an organisation called Habit Tree. And so if you're interested in habit and what it takes to build habits, it's a really, really good resource. So, what is a habit? So, if we put it in layman's terms, habits are the things our brain uses to repeat stuff that we have done before. And it's basically an evolutionary efficiency mechanism. So, as you do something regularly, it becomes a habit and eventually it becomes subconscious. And you'll know this if you are a driver. When you first start to drive, you have to really, really think about what it is that you are doing. But as you become more accustomed to driving, as it's something that you do more regularly, these habits become ingrained and they move from a conscious action that we're taking to a subconscious action, which means that we're doing it without thinking about it at all. And as I was just saying, this is stuff we do on autopilot, can be done with almost no effort whatsoever. No thinking in a lot of cases is just done while we're on autopilot. So a habit or something that you do regularly that becomes subconscious must be triggered. At first, you remind yourself to do it again and again and again, but with enough practice, it then becomes unconscious. Going back to what we do, what we do when we drive, or what we do when we cook a favourite meal. After you've done it often enough, you'll find that you're not having to think about it. You're just doing it on autopilot. And these habits work even when we're exhausted. So we talked about it before, but willpower is a limited resource. Willpower tends to be really strong at the beginning of a new weight loss journey, but the longer you're on the journey, the less willpower people tend to have, which is why diets often become harder to stick to because that willpower becomes exhausted. The good thing is you can build habits that you use and you rely on other than your willpower, and this is something that we're going to cover a lot today. So, what is a habit? Excuse me. What we do in life, 60% of what we do is intentional. So we do it with intent, we do it with thought. 40% of what we do in life is done as part of a habit or on autopilot. So things like when you're getting your children ready for school, eventually you're not thinking about it, you're just doing it. Same with driving, same with cooking recipes. Anything done often enough becomes a habit and becomes subconscious. So what we're going to talk a little bit about now is something called the habit loop, and this was taken from work done by Charles Duhigg. I don't know if I'm saying his surname right. If you want to look at it in any more detail, look at The Power of Habit. So for a habit to work, it has to have a trigger, and a trigger is, put simply, just a reminder, and that reminder can be conscious or subconscious, and that reminder initiates behaviour. So in the context of driving, you might see the car in front of you's brakes go on, and the trigger for that is the red light that comes on at the back. You see that, and subconsciously you will be starting to press your own brake pedal because that red light trigger makes you understand that the car in front is going to slow down, and that trigger initiates you slowing down as well. Then you have the action or the behaviour itself. So back to that car example, the trigger would be the red light coming on or noticing that the car in front is slowing down. The action that you take or the behaviour that you exhibit would be pressing your brake pedal to slow yourself down. And then moving on, you get the reward or the benefit you gain from doing the habit. So the action was depressing the brake pedal, so you start to slow down. The reward in this scenario would be not crashing into the car in front of you, but we can really easily take that into a dieting or an activity based scenario. So if you're dieting, your trigger might be that you track your food in the morning, and then that trigger of tracking your food leads to an action, and the action being eating the food that you've planned to eat. And then the reward you get from that is immediately you feel good, you feel positive, you feel in control, and longer term you get the results that you want on the scales. So that's an example in a diet scenario. When it comes to activity or exercise, your trigger might be that you've left your gym bag by the door. You go to leave in the morning, you see that gym bag, that triggers you, it reminds you, that leads you to take action. So you're putting your gym bag in your car. That then leads you to doing the session, and the reward you get for that is knowing that you've done it, feeling really good, and the longer term reward is feeling the benefits of that session. And that reinforcement or that positive feeling you get and that reward you get then tends to mean that you will do it more often. So if the behaviour is positive, then the desire to repeat the behaviour will be reinforced when you see the trigger. And the more you go through this loop, the more reinforced it will be, and then eventually it will become second nature. So let's look at the anatomy of a trigger. There's 4 features in the anatomy of a trigger. The first is frequency. The more you do it, the more likely you are for that behaviour loop to be ingrained. So it takes time for things to become a habit. They have to be performed in a consistent context for the loop to get ingrained. So the more you leave your gym bag by the door and the more you go and do your sessions, the more positive you're going to feel, and that's going to get you results. And the more you go through that process, the more that will become ingrained. And I can take this into quite a personal context for me. My alarm goes off in the morning, and my immediate feeling is excitement to get out to go and do my session because I know it's going to make me feel good. But it's taken quite a lot of repetition and quite a lot of frequency to get to that place. Has to be automatic. So habits are things that we do subconsciously almost entirely. They take almost no effort, and they often happen when we are putting effort into doing other things or we are concentrating on other things. So if it's frequent, so it's repeating. If it's automatic, so it's not something we're having to consciously do, then that is a trigger. Triggered means something in our environment flicks a switch. So there's a really interesting thing you could look at here. If you wanted to do something first thing in the morning, and one of the first things that you do is go and make yourself a cup of coffee or a cup of tea, if you put a reminder by the kettle or your coffee machine to do the thing that you want to do, that becomes a trigger. And then eventually, after long enough, you will go to make your cup of tea or your cup of coffee, and you won't need that reminder because making the cup of tea or the cup of coffee in itself becomes a trigger that then triggers you to exhibit the behaviour. So for example, it could be, I don't know, I want to do 10 sit-ups, 10 press-ups, 10 squats as my kettle is boiling. If you do that for long enough with the reminder of the note there, eventually as soon as you come down and put the kettle on, you're going to do that behaviour because it's something that's become ingrained. And then we go into the subconscious. So these habits take place almost entirely in our subconscious, so it's below our level of awareness, both the trigger and then the action that you take as a result of it. So let's look at how we can design habits. How can we use this knowledge to help us in our own personal journeys? So it needs to be obvious, and I will talk about these in a minute. It needs to be frequent, it needs to be triggered, it needs to be personalizable, can't even say it, and it needs to be under your control. So if you want to create a habit from a trigger, it needs to be obvious. You need to be able to go and talk to your gran about it, and even your gran to understand how that links. So for example, if you say, okay, I want to lose weight. I know something that's really good for losing weight is eating more vegetables because it bulks me out without using up lots of calories. Pretty sure if you went and explained that to your gran, she would understand why and it would be obvious enough for it to work. If you take the same kind of example of, okay, I want to lose weight, I know that eating lots of vegetables helps me lose weight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have an allotment and I'm going to grow my own vegetables. And the habit will be to go and tend my allotment 3 times a week. Is that obvious enough for it to work? I would say probably not. It needs to have a really clear link to the outcome that you want. Needs to be frequent. So not only does it need to be obvious, but you need to be able to repeat it. It needs to be happening a lot so it becomes a trigger. So so if it becomes a habit, so choosing something that's healthy that leads you to the outcome you want regularly means that it's going to become more habit based. Needs to be done really frequently, so it's something that can go to sink down into your subconscious. Needs to be triggered, so there needs to be a reminder within your environment that it's something that you can do. So the trigger could be that you input stuff into your tracker for the whole day in the morning. That then leads to the first action of having a healthy breakfast, the one that you put in your tracker, and that becomes, you get a switch that flicks in your environment. That leads to an action, that leads to a behavioural reward, and it's more likely to become repeatable and therefore become a habit. Needs to be personalisable, which again, not very easy for me to say. It needs to be something that works for you. Habits that other people have built are all very well for other people, but it needs to work for you and it needs to work within your environment. And equally, it needs to be under your control. There's no point me telling you what triggers you need and then what action you need to do. It needs to be something that's under your control, that fits within your journey, is completely personal to you, and then is obvious and can be done frequently and can be done as a result of a trigger. So let's look at the obvious side of things. The closer a habit links to your goals, the more likely you are to follow through on it. So if weight loss is really, really important to you, you are more likely to be able to design a habit that helps you meet that goal. The more complicated something is, the less likely we are to feel in control of it, and again, lowers your chance of following through. So let's make it simple. Let's not overcomplicate things. Let's not go and tend our allotment when the overall goal is to eat more vegetables. Let's look at things like buying the vegetables, therefore you're being more likely to eat it. To make it really simple, I'm a big fan of keep it simple stupid, or KISS, because I massively overcomplicate everything. So let's make life easy. Let's keep it simple, because that way you're more likely to follow through on it. Would my gran understand why this would work? Would your gran understand why you're tending your allotment if your goal is to lose weight? I would say potentially not. The link between your habit and your goal should be really, really obvious. So eating vegetables, bulking out your meals for a low calorie option then helps you lose weight. It should be really, really clear. So let's look at frequency. So to reinforce this habit loop, we need to be initiating it really frequently. So, example, I will go to swimming lessons once a month. This behaviour not frequent enough to reinforce the habit loop and become subconscious. Can it be done daily? Ideally, sometimes even multiple points through the day. So make sure the behaviour that you want to practice can be done daily or at least very close to it. And if the behaviour is that you want to eat vegetables at every meal, then that can be done 3 times a day, and that is more likely to help get it become ingrained. Let's look at the triggering thing. So habits by definition are actions triggered by something in the environment, be that physical or social. So if we look at the social side of things, and let's look at a more negative habit or a negative trigger, people tend to find, if we look at smoking, that if they go out with their friends and they go for a drink, they automatically have a cigarette and they become social smokers. And that's a much more negative trigger, but it's triggered by both the environment they're in and the social context they're in. Equally, if you go out for a night out with friends, that tends to trigger things like late night takeaways. Again, it's not necessarily a healthy trigger, but it's one that you can be aware of, so you can try, if you need to prevent the behaviour by slightly changing your environment or changing the people you're with, or even acknowledging at the beginning of the night, this is likely to happen, I don't want it to, so I'm going to go home a bit earlier. So if there's no trigger, there is going to be no habit. If there is no reminder, you are not going to exhibit the behaviour that you want to. You can piggyback something. You can use an existing behaviour to be your new habits trigger, otherwise known as habit stacking. So I go back to the example of making a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, having that reminder to do 10 sit-ups, 10 squats, 10 press-ups. And what you're doing is you're stacking a new habit on top of something you're already doing, or you're piggybacking it. And if you're piggybacking that new habit or that trigger onto an existing habit, you are more likely to do it. Can it be triggered? So when will I do this? If there's something that you really want to do, think, right, when can I place a trigger to make this behaviour likely to happen? And what I'm going to do is, for example, that cup of coffee. So before or after this current habit, I will do this. So if I make it personal for me, before I do anything in the morning, I am going to track in my Fitness Pal. And at that point, that's when I will make breakfast, because I will have tracked it and I know I'm going to be making a good choice. Or another example, before my morning shower, I will do 10 press ups. So your morning shower is your current habit, and that then becomes a trigger to do your 10 press ups, which is your new habit that you want to get ingrained. So we're going to cover this a little bit more in the next habits lecture. So designing habits, let's look at making it more personalised. So we must be 90 to 100% certain we can achieve our habit on a daily basis. If it's something that we are less likely to do, it is far less likely to become ingrained and therefore become a habit. We all have different circumstances and we must personalise our habits. And this may mean making a habit that we want to ingrain smaller or larger. And I'm going to use an example of this, of getting a really, really good night's sleep. Everyone knows that we should be getting plenty of sleep. However, our circumstances as individuals are very different. Some of us have small children, which means getting a really good night's sleep isn't necessarily down to us. So aiming for 8 hours of sleep if you've got a tiny baby is probably not 90 to 100% certain that you can achieve it. So what you can do is you can change the habit you want to make. Rather than aiming to get 8 to 8 hours sleep per day, what you can do is say, I'm going to go to bed at this time every night. Might mean that I may not get my 8 hours sleep that I'd like to get, but it means that I'm going to be in bed and I'm more likely to get more sleep regardless of the waking times of the baby. And be able to modify it, so bringing it to a food context. So rather than saying I am 90 to 100% confident I will eat 120 grams of protein per day, what you can do is you can break it down. I'm 90 to 100% confident that I will eat 40 grams of protein each meal for the next 7 days. And that means you've got a smaller goal, something smaller to aim at, which means you're more likely to be able to achieve it. So change the frequency, change it from every day to 1 meal per day. Make life a bit easier for yourself. So you can change the intensity of it. Rather than saying, right, every morning when I make myself a cup of coffee, I'm going to do 100 press-ups. What you could say is I'm going to do 10 press-ups, or I'm going to do 2, because in all likelihood, by the time you've done the second one, you're more likely to continue than if you say, well, I'm going to do 100, when you might just think, I'm not even going to start. So make the goal smaller, make it more achievable, and once you've done your second, you are more likely to build on it. So change the units, make the amount that you're aiming at smaller, because you can hit your 20 grams and then think, oh, I feel pretty good, let's build on that. And use any variable to get the habit to 90% of confidence. So make sure that you are tailoring the frequency, the intensity, or the units to you to give you that 90 to 100% confidence rate. So let's go into how we design habits and how we make them controllable. The habit needs to be 100% under your control. And this is the most important principle of good habit design. Habits that other people exhibit are great for them, as I said before, but it needs to work for us as well, otherwise it won't become ingrained. You can't rely on other people or other events to be able to practice. It needs to be 100% down to you. So, going back to the sleeping 8 hours a night, if you've got a tiny baby or a sick husband or a sick child that's going to be waking you up or you need to look after, that's going to put your habit out of the window. So this is something that needs to be 100% within your control. Going to bed at the same time every night or a time that's good for you every night is something you can't control. How many times your small and annoying children wake you up isn't something you can control. So work on what you can control, not what other people have an influence in. Because not only you've got small and annoying children, what if you can't fall asleep? What if you wake up? What if your child gets sick? Control your sleep routine, which means that you are taking as much control as you can over the things that you can control. Is it completely under my control? If the answer is no, then that is not going to become a habit because it's something that you can't influence. So that brings us to the end of the first stage of our habits talk. We are looking at the triggers, the behaviours and the rewards you get, and we are designing those triggers and the behaviours you exhibit when those triggers happen to help you on your journey. Make life as easy as you can, make it controllable, make it frequent, work on the triggers, work on your confidence levels of it. Use those this week, see if they help you. Think about your triggers, think about what behaviour you want to become ingrained, and then put a couple of things in place and let's see how you get on. Thanks ever so much, and I will see you next time.